Hi, everybody. I think we might get started because we've got a very busy schedule for tonight. Welcome, everyone who is here and those who are joining in a moment for the Rosalie Rendu Forum 2021. Before I continue, I would just like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us here this evening. I would also ask you all or encourage you all to please put in the comments box tonight, the chat box, your name and the Aboriginal land in which you're joining from this evening. I would now like to introduce Padma Raman as the facilitator of tonight. Padma's work in legal advocacy has long been committed to the protection and advancements of human rights. This earned her a Public Service Medal for outstanding service leading significant cultural, technological, and governance change, as well as major law reform on the areas of social policy regarding family violence, sexual assault, and the accessibility of reproductive technology. Padma previously worked as the CEO of the Victorian Law Reform Commission and was the Chief Executive of the Australian Human Rights Commission for over 10 years. Padma is currently the CEO of Australia's National Research Organisation for Women's Safety, also known as ANROS, which I'm sure some of you may have heard of, and has been overseeing research into the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on domestic and family violence. Welcome, Padma, and thank you for being here tonight.
Hello and welcome everyone. Before we begin this event tonight, can I ask Lisa Buxton? We were hoping to have Auntie Anne Weldon to do our Welcome to Country, but Auntie Anne's unwell. Can I ask Lisa to do an Acknowledgement of Country? Thank you.
Jingri Walu, Naya Gala Nari Lisa, Banjalang Dubai. Our language is much more than words, and it's not only a communication tool, but a direct link to one's country. This country we now know as Australia is one of the most linguistically diverse places on earth, with languages that are unique to place. In New South Wales alone, there are 70 different languages. So as a visitor from Bunjalung and Yugambeh country, I'd like to acknowledge the custodians of the country that I'm sitting on this evening, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is bound by three mighty rivers, the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean to the west, and Georges River to the south. Our history is written within country. I pay my respects to our ancestors of the four directions and honour our elders and knowledge holders who have passed, who looked after country for tens of thousands of years. I acknowledge also with respect the elders of today, who are passing on their knowledge, our language and way of being and spiritual connections to country. As we come together for this important forum to discuss the intersections between domestic and family violence, gender and poverty, to listen to each other, learn from each other and share ways of supporting social and emotional well-being and strengthening and empowering our families. Unfortunately, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are between 2 and 5 times more likely than other Australians to experience domestic and family violence. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are 35 times more likely to be hospitalised due to family violence-related assaults than other Australian women. So let's just take a quiet moment to reflect on the importance of country on which you're sitting. May we all walk gently and thoughtfully on country, remembering the footsteps of all of our ancestors that walked before us and those who will follow us. Uguba. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was such a beautiful acknowledgement of country. Can I too acknowledge that I come to you from Gadigal land and pay my deep, deep respects to elders past and present. So welcome everybody. Welcome to our special guests, our wonderful panelists. I'll introduce them shortly, but welcome also to representatives from St Vincent de Paul Society, particularly State Council, and board members, society members, volunteers and staff. Welcome new colleagues and supporters. So tonight we will be discussing the shadow pandemic of domestic and family violence, gender and poverty. With each of us coming to this topic from different lived experience, professional knowledge, our forum will explore the complex and ever-evolving topic through multiple lenses, including social policy, law reform, community outreach, lived experience, and First Nations knowledge. Family violence is the leading cause of homelessness, and women represent 60% of people seeking emergency assistance with their housing needs from specialist homelessness services. Anne-Rose has been doing some really interesting work with the Australian Institute of Criminology during the pandemic and looking at the impact of the pandemic on domestic and family violence. The AIC, the Institute of Criminology, interviewed more than 15,000 women and found that 2/3 of those reporting violence said that the violence had either been the first time they'd experienced it or a severe escalation during the first 3 months of the pandemic, largely during lockdown. For me, the really interesting thing about that research was the primary indicator of violence was in fact economic insecurity. While there were other factors like drug and alcohol and other factors that impacted on it, it was economic insecurity that lay at the heart of the escalation and first-time experience of family violence. In the first quarter of this year, most of which has been in lockdown, Vinnies, New South Wales have seen a 20% increase in the number of people seeking assistance for domestic violence compared to the same time last year. Compounding the strain on women, since May 2021, 61% of job losses have been in female-dominated industries such as hospitality, childcare, and the arts. I hope you heard all of that. I've just seen that I was on mute for some of it. Before we get into the topic and the panelists tonight, can I introduce Brooke Simmons to lead a short spiritual reflection. Brooke is the Vice President, Social Justice and Chair of the Social Justice Committee. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you, Padma. Look, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Camaragal people, the custodians of the land from which I am joining you tonight. So, almost 200 years after Blessed Rosalie Rendu arrived in Paris, we come together this evening for the 2021 Rosalie Rendu Forum, named in honour of a remarkable woman who was a mentor and inspiration to the founders of the St Vincent de Paul Society. Born in 1786 in the mountains of France as Jean-Marie Rendu and the eldest of 4 girls, Blessed Rosalie was just 3 years old when the French Revolution broke out. As many faithful priests fled from persecution in the city, the Rendu family home was a refuge for many along the way to safety. So the revolution prevailed in 1799, and in 1796, Jean-Marie's father and younger sister passed away, and Jean-Marie stepped up to look after her mother and her other sisters. After seeing the sisters at work in the local hospital and being inspired by their efforts, she joined the Daughters of Charity when she was 16 years old. She was given the name Sister Rosalie and sent to Paris to work with the poor. She was to call the slums of the Mouffetard district home for the next 54 years. Rosalie was aware of the great need around her. She worked tirelessly, dedicating herself to helping as many people as she possibly could. She opened a free clinic, a pharmacy, a school, an orphanage, a childcare centre, a home for the elderly, and a youth club for young workers. She also organised sewing and embroidery classes. Many of these initiatives were to support widows, young girls, and working mothers, a group far more likely to become trapped in poverty in 19th century Paris. Fast forward to 2021, and the marginalisation of women and girls continues today, with domestic and family violence becoming an increasingly prevalent issue. With women experiencing disproportionate rates of domestic and family violence, this can have dire consequences for their physical and mental well-being and can increase their risk of becoming trapped in poverty. Reasons for this include social isolation and a significant loss of resources after fleeing an abusive relationship or being evicted from an abusive home. While Sister Rosalie was busy at work in the slums of Paris, in 1833, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul was founded by Blessed Frederick Ozanam and his friends. Emmanuel Bailly, their first president, enlisted Sister Rosalie as assistant to mentor the group. She provided spiritual and practical guidance and introduced them to poor families who they could assist. Rosalie's influence on society is still evident in the approach we take to all our works today. Like Rosalie, the Society works tirelessly to assist the most vulnerable in our communities. We've founded many programs and services to meet the needs of women and women with children who've experienced domestic and family violence. Today, these services include specialised domestic and family violence case management and accommodation services. Insufficient safe and affordable housing options and crisis accommodation in Australia means that many victim survivors of domestic and family violence are imprisoned in a cycle of violence and homelessness. Like Rosalie, we continue to provide financial, material, and emotional support where we can and have an understanding of the intricate links between poverty, gender, and violence. But yet we still ask ourselves, what more can we do to help? Rosalie was no stranger to poverty, violence, or illness. She witnessed firsthand the bloody uprisings of 1830 and 48 and the epidemics of 1832, 49, and 54. Throughout these years, Rosalie worked tirelessly with little regard for her own health and safety. Since the COVID-19 pandemic took hold in Australia early last year, Vincentians have continued to assist the vulnerable in a variety of ways, though perhaps with a little more regard for our own health and safety, thanks to technological advances. As we start to return to a sense of normality in our lives, today we turn our attention to the signs of the shadow pandemic and the complex connections between poverty and domestic violence. Like Rosalie and the Rendu family, the members, volunteers, and employees of St. Vincent de Paul Society, New South Wales, continue to provide the chance of a new life free from violence and disadvantage. We continue to give people a hand up during their times of need. And we remember the words of Blessed Rosalie Rendu, who taught us, if you want someone to love you, you must be the first to love. And if you have nothing to give yourself. Thank you.
It was Mum who rang me up when she realised what was going on, and she pretty much made the call that if I didn't leave, she would call fax. We don't want fax, and I don't want to lose my kid. And that's when everything came out. He was an alcoholic. We had to get out because, all our money, everything was gone. I couldn't do it. I was so tired and exhausted. I was sick. I had asthma myself, and my ex was very verbally abusive towards me, but it was the boys, that was going to get the belt or the spoon. From the outside, I might have looked all right, but no one really knew what was in the inside. And we're definitely in a better position now than what we were in. Just want to move forward and create better memories.
Now, I just wanted to share that with you all this evening, just before we move into our panel discussion for tonight, because we all thought that it was a good opportunity for us to demonstrate some of the challenges that people experiencing domestic and family violence have to live through, and also the ways in which St. Vincent de Paul Society New South Wales have been supporting and continue to support people experiencing domestic and family violence. I'll now return back to Padma, and she will continue on with the evening. Thanks, Padma.
Thanks, Sarah. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce you to our panel. We have Christine Robinson. Christine is a Bundjalung woman from northern New South Wales who has worked for 25 years in the area of domestic and family violence and sexual assault. She is the coordinator of Wirringabaya Community Legal Centre, which provides First Nations women and children who've experienced lived experience of violence with culturally sensitive support in accessing legal representation, advocacy and advice. Welcome, Christine. We have Rosemary Kariaku. Rosemary is the Multicultural Community Liaison Officer for the Parramatta Police, helping migrants who are facing domestic violence, language barriers and financial distress. After leaving Kenya in 1999, her experience as a migrant to Australia led her to work in partnership with the African Women's Group, fostering a safe and supportive community for migrant women in Sydney. Rosemary was the winner of this year's Local Hero Award at the Australian of the Year Awards. Congratulations, Rosemary, and welcome. Pieter. Pieter's joining us to share her own lived experience and recovery from domestic and family violence. Pieter will highlight how domestic and family violence has a range of impacts on an individual's mental health, sometimes leading to issues such as significant loneliness, drugs and alcohol misuse, and family breakdown. Since then, Pieter has done remarkable things to re-establish herself and has been in a healthy relationship for some time. Welcome, Pieter. And finally, Annabelle Daniel Oam. Annabelle is the CEO of Women's Community Shelters and has worked in social services sector for over 20 years, specialising in issues affecting women and families. She was formerly the manager of Elsie's, which is Australia's longest established women's shelter. This women's service is now being managed by St Vincent de Paul Society New South Wales. Annabelle has been awarded an Order of Australia Medal for her service to women through social welfare initiatives. Annabelle has also been a bit of a media star over the last week. Her powerful advocacy, along with others, has led to the largest single investment by the New South Wales government this week in investing in refuges and social housing, $484 million. So welcome, Annabelle. Can you all turn your cameras on and your mics on so we can see you all? Thank you so much. Such a great panel. So I might just start with some opening remarks from each of you, and maybe just to start with the communities you work with and based on your own experience. What are the issues and concerns that have remained consistent over time, and how do you think that domestic and family violence and its connection to gender-based poverty, has it changed? Has there been any change in all that time? I might start with you, Christine. It would be really great to hear your opening remarks.
Yes, thank you, Vinnies, for inviting me here tonight. And before I do start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. And I'd like to acknowledge any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in the room tonight, or on the online tonight. I think one of the things is around poverty. Poverty looks different to different people, and people's experiences and understanding of what poverty is. But from our perspective, as an Aboriginal woman, the poverty that we are talking about is clients that ring our service that have no money for petrol, have no money for food, have no money for accommodation, have no money to feed their children, and that will continue to live in violent relationships because there is nowhere to go. So I must acknowledge Annabelle and the great work that she's done around that, providing increasing funding, even though increasing the funding for women across the state to be able to have affordable, hopefully affordable and more housing, and appropriate and a culturally appropriate housing. But in saying that, I think the issues for us is that, we see that over time, poverty doesn't really change. It changes. It changes from time to time, but we're still seeing Aboriginal people greatly impacted by poverty. We're also seeing Aboriginal people still be impacted by domestic and family violence, and a lack of resources, a lack of services, and a lack of people being understanding in that space. I think some of the things that I wanted to just touch on was the judgmental attitudes and the stereotypical attitudes, particularly with Prue Goward's comments today, or the comments that we're hearing from Prue Goward saying that, you know, people pretty much pick their own destiny. That's how I see it, is people choose. People don't choose to be poor. People don't choose to live in poverty. But I do think what we need to look at is how we can work and accept people, but also how we can provide services and support people in these situations. I think that's one of the things moving forward that I just wanted to add, and just being sure that, being aware that Aboriginal people's experiences of poverty is different to other people's. You know, we're all people, but our experiences and our life experiences and what we go through is completely different. And one of those things is we look at Wilcannia in the COVID situation, how when they were trying to self-isolate, there was nowhere to self-isolate. People were living in tents. The government had to take motor homes up there for people to live in, but there was no accommodation. People had no money to go anywhere else, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing overcrowded houses. We're seeing people live in lines, and we're seeing people not being able to leave because they don't have the resources to do so. All right, sorry.
Thank you. Annabelle, given that Christine's talked about the major initiative this week, would you like to comment on whether you've seen any changes?
I'd be happy to, and firstly, let me acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal land this evening, and I'm blessed to live, work and raise my children on Aboriginal land. Our shelter network also takes in Darawal and Worimi country. I thank you, Christine, for those kind words. I think what I've seen over time, working in the sector is really there are many structural factors which are actually working to entrench poverty now, which includes a lack of social and affordable housing build for most of the last 30 to 40 years, but also the fact that the New Start allowance and all of those amounts that will help somebody survive if they do leave really haven't increased over time. And what we also know from the pandemic research, as you'd be familiar with, Padma, is that a lot of women who experience coercive control and financial abuse as part of their relationship have been pressured to hand over sums of money or to access their superannuation and to give that to abusive partners. So we're really seeing some of the pandemic factors very specifically collide with coercive control and actually work to entrench poverty even further. But if I reflect back on the sector even 15 years ago, it was actually much easier to get social housing for the women that we were working with and sort of transition them through the refuge sector and actually out into that priority housing. Then it might have been a matter of weeks or a couple of months, but now it's actually years. We know the social housing wait lists are incredibly long. And we know that having those places of safety with support and with that community wraparound is incredibly important for women who are going through the process of building a new future after experiencing domestic and family violence. So I think, the announcement this week is incredibly exciting, and I'm really, really proud to have been there and here at this moment. It's really significant. And I think it's great that we're opening up those opportunities, because as we know, sometimes when women make that first phone call to say, I need to leave and I need somewhere safe to go, they're rolling the dice when they make that phone call. And if there's not that safe place, it can be the only shot they get at leaving. So it's good that we're putting a lot of investment towards that. As a sector, what we now need to do is work with the government to make sure that is spent very well and in the right places and with the right supports. And we need to continue our advocacy around rates of New Start allowance and also that social housing pipeline.
Thank you, Annabelle. And just thinking about the pandemic, Rosemary, I think about people on temporary migration status and the lack of support that we've seen for people, but for migrants who are either migrants and international students. What have you seen from your perspective as a liaison person with the police?
Yeah, thank you, Fatma. And I'm also sitting on Darawal land, and I acknowledge the Aboriginal people who are here, the past and the present. My grandson is Aboriginal, so I am home here. And within my work and within my volunteer work, that is like the big chunk of what I do. It's especially this pandemic is very, very hard. And when we are talking about poverty, I'm thinking poverty. That's a normal thing for the migrants, for the refugees. That's a normal thing. And the hardest part is in my area of work is a lot of arranged marriages that come and settle here. They come, their visa, their passport is taken, everything they have, their qualifications is taken. You are not allowed to talk to your neighbors. You are not allowed to call your family. You don't have a credit card. You don't have even a phone. You don't have even internet. So what do you call poverty? And even if you are given a card, a credit card, you cannot use that money. You are in the shops, you are told to use only $50, and maybe sometimes you feel hungry, you have to call and say, can I buy Macca's? McDonald's is only $10. So what can we call poverty? And that's what I see in my area of work, that many women, they don't know the services are out there for them. They don't know. And that's the difference, because the people who have grown up here, they know there's a refuge home or they can call. But the migrants who come here, whether it's a migration skilled migrant, whether it's refugees, whether it is international students, they don't know. And because they don't have any money on them, they have nothing apart from their name. So it's really hard, and it's the information. So they don't have the information and have been saying a lot. I don't know whether when anybody comes here, they need to have like a 1 year compulsory to attend a healthy relationship, domestic violence, so that at least they can remember the 000 numbers, because we've seen a lot of abuse in this area.
Thank you, Rosemary. And, we've seen those heartbreaking long lines of people waiting at food banks, both in Melbourne and Sydney, largely made up of migrants and temporary visa holders and refugees. Peter, I wonder if you could reflect on poverty and housing and how important that was for you.
Yeah, sure I can. Sorry, I was just listening to Annabelle speak and hearing what she's saying about the whole waiting list. And I guess from my own experience of domestic violence and what I was going through, and even Donna Boyd from Vinnies and Rosalie, who were actually a godsend to me and tried so hard to help me through that period, that actually it wasn't as simple as just going. And I was in Housing Commission and I needed to get out of a relationship, but I couldn't just go to a refuge because I'd lose my housing property. Housing couldn't transfer me because there's just nowhere to transfer me to keep me. The process was, and so I guess a significant change from when I was in domestic violence to today is the fact that there is change happening, that there is refuges for women to go to. They are really understanding that the housing needs are significant for safety, and that it's actually happening. And I guess that teary makes me cry, because living in it, it's all you want is a safe place to be. And everyone deserves that. And it's just amazing. Yes, hearing yesterday how much money the actual new Premier is now about to put into building new safe havens. Hopefully eventually will be built for not just one nationality or one sector of people, but around the board. And that, I guess, you talk about gender-based poverty, and I guess that is I guess cultural as well. There is a lot of change that has happened since my own experience. I guess it's even frontline, from police coming to your front doorstep to deal with a domestic violence situation, and how they actually deal with you and approach you. It's there's huge change in the way they deal with it. They've been obviously more educated, and there's more knowledge on domestic violence these days. And the severity and the seriousness that it is, that change needs to happen. And I guess listening to your talk, and obviously I watch the news and I read a lot of things on the internet these days, and there's just so much change that I wish that I had. And I'm so happy for that women that are going through this in this day and age will have that opportunity that I wish that I had, you know, when I was going through it. But it's so good to hear and see that someone else will have that. You know, I'm really happy. So yeah, I guess a lot of change has happened from my own experience. Like I was talking that before we came on to online, and how much actually has changed. Unfortunately, it's taken a lot of big incidents to be, you know, put in the news and in the newspapers of tragedy related to domestic violence. And I mean, if we want to talk about poverty, I mean, as I think you guys have all said, that poverty comes in all forms and shapes and sizes, and everyone has a different version of it. But poverty is a big part of domestic violence. And it's the emotion and the stress that domestic violence comes with that poverty. I mean, I was just lucky that I had such a wonderful support network with Vinnies at Roselle. Donna Boyd was like a mother I never had. She was absolutely amazing. I always praise her because she's the one that I know from Roselle, and the members in the board, where when I was going through court proceedings, unfortunately I lost my children because of domestic violence, and they were placed into care. And I had Vinnies that actually came with me to court to help me and try my hardest to get my children back into my care. Unfortunately, I wasn't that successful, and my kids remain in care. But Vinnies supported me and were there for me throughout my, I guess, me coming out on the other side and living without the domestic violence. And yeah, it was kind of like learning to live again. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter. That's
You're
just, it's incredibly generous of you to share that with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
And it's good to see that you have optimism and you've got the generosity to think about other people having a better experience of the system. It feels like we've been having these conversations for such a long time, and for someone who's experienced it to actually to feel like there's change happening is greatly satisfying for us working in it, who feel like it's just hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, one of the things that came through for some of you who might have watched the Women's Safety Summit, there was a real concern that poverty and housing were not actually topics that were in the agenda per se, but they did come through, both in the statement that came out of the summit. There was a strong sense that you can't deal with family and domestic violence unless you actually deal with the fundamental rights that women have to housing. So Annabelle, would you like to reflect on that from what you saw with the Safety Summit, and it feels like there's been a response to that with this New South Wales announcement, both with this announcement and the announcement last week for some more social housing.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot too in how we frame it in terms of our advocacy, which is that building social housing actually aids an economic recovery for the state as well, you know, aside from the benefit that it provides very clearly. But I think we also need to talk about, no one can think straight, plan or build a future if you're worried about where you're going to sleep tonight or tomorrow night, or that you've got your kids in the back of the car. It's not, you know, housing is absolutely foundational to people feeling safe, secure, and to get our brains out of survival mode and into, oh, I can exhale, I can think about, you know, next steps. And I think unless we talk about it and frame it in that way, as you've said, Padma, as a human rights issue, but also as fundamentally understanding that it is foundational to people just to be able to, you know, to think and plan a future. you know, it's absolutely necessary. And in the work that we do, I think what I see as being the magic source to all of this is the safe housing, the professional support, but it is also the community inclusion and walking alongside women and kids and making them feel part of the community, included, supported, welcomed, busting all that shame around domestic and family violence. It's so incredibly important to know that your community around you supports you. And I think that that's a very necessary element of all of those things. But absolutely, safe housing, the time and space to breathe, to build a new future, to know that you can lock the door at night, to know that you are somewhere where you're not looking over your shoulder all the time, is, as I say, it's foundational.
Yeah, and Christine, you talked about how this is not something that Aboriginal communities necessarily experience, you know, not just in a pandemic, but more generally. Would you like to reflect on that more, especially in the context of what's been happening in Western New South Wales? You're on mute, Christine. It's the saying of 2020 and 2021, isn't it?
Someone must have turned me off. Yeah, all right. Yeah, just adding to that, I think because we're a statewide service, Warringah Bay is an Aboriginal women's legal service and we're statewide. So we actually are not just looking in urban, you know, local Sydney, we're looking at across the state. So we see pockets of areas where there are no refuges, there are no accommodation services, there is just nowhere to live. So building up the capacity in rural and remote regional areas is very important. What that looks like, I think, and I just think, and I want to go back to the change thing as well, because I have a long history with LCs, and I had a long history with LCs, and I worked there for 4 years at one point. So it was hugely different how refuges operated back in those days, and I do think one of the things with the homelessness reforms actually was 2 steps backwards, I feel, and I really feel like refugees need to be able to move back into that space of what the kind of support they used to offer years ago. And I'm not saying that all of them don't offer it, but I do think that there needs to be more crisis accommodation, more medium, short-term, long-term, and it's not just a house over roof over someone's head, it's that support element as well. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, that we don't just look at you know, beds and bums on beds and roofs over our heads, that we look at that whole holistic approach, that we encompass all of that, because things, as we said, communities are different where they're located and how they respond. And actually having Aboriginal women that try to seek assistance and have discrimination or have issues like that, you know, appear when they're trying to seek assistance or support or safety, is one of the other things that's really an issue with the Aboriginal community. So I do think it's about, you know, accessing all those services, having housing, but looking at the needs of each community. I think we really need investment. Part of the investment is talking to a community about what they think is best for them as well. It's not us just thinking that we know what's best, one size fits all. We need to have these conversations. And even though I've always advocated for women in a women's space of having shelters, I also have more recently been advocating on the space of men as perpetrators having a roof over their head, because I actually sit on the New South Wales Death Review team, and one of the situations is that sometimes the woman or the female, you know, the female victim may actually feel like she feels guilty or she feels responsible because they've got nowhere to go. She houses them and she ends up being a homicide death. And so that's what our concern is that we need to also provide some accommodation for men, so that we've got somewhere for the men to go and women can actually remain in their house if they think that's safe, particularly for women, Aboriginal women that live in community. If they don't want to leave their community because all their connections or their family's there, their culture, everything is there, well, we shouldn't need to move them off country, off land. We should be able to provide a safe place for them, keep their safe space, but give men somewhere to go to live, you know, so they can actually move on with their lives if necessary.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. I think one of the things that we struggle with is to recognise, I mean, this is really complex. Complexity is at the centre of this, and I think a lot of government responses try and reduce that complexity, but it is complex, isn't it? And as you say, we have to think about the men as well. One of the really interesting things I've been thinking about in terms of the gaps in research is we have lots of research on victimization. So we can say 1 in 5 women have been sexually assaulted. We don't have that information on perpetration. So we can't say 1 in 7 men perpetrate or 1 in 10 men perpetrate. We don't know how many men serially perpetrate. So there's a lot of work to do in understanding, well, in recognizing that this is a complex problem that needs really complex solutions, and that reducing us down to particular aspects of identity might not necessarily work. Rosemary, I think picking up on what Christine said, how would you reflect on that with the work you've done on immigrant and refugee populations, both in terms of housing, but also in terms of access to services?
Yeah, first of all, the called community women, as I said before, they don't have the information. And it is a norm. It's normal because they have seen their parents, they have seen their grandparents. So by the time somebody comes out, it's a big ask. So what we do is giving a lot of information. For example, if you have watched Rosemary's Way, when I do the culture exchange program, when we go away for those 3 days and the women have relaxed, they started sharing with each other, and they tell them, oh, Rosemary will help you. And I'm telling you, all the women who have gone with me all those 11 years, they have never been the same. If they don't live that abusive relationship, they're empowered. They know they're right. Because what our big problem, and I'm talking when I say we, it's the migrants, refugees, international students, is we don't know that that's an abuse. So we stay there. We don't know that when your partner or husband tells you, you can't call your mom, you think it's okay, because when you are being brought, you are told you respect your husband, you have to be submissive to your husband, you have to cook for your husband, you have to be in the house at this time. I remember when I was married, I used to be given a curfew. You cannot come in the house after 7 p.m. And then I bargained. I was given up to 8 p.m. But I didn't know that it was like I have a right. You have to be a second citizen. Like when the women come to me, I ask them, can you discuss this with your mother-in-law? And because they're living together, and he said, how can my mother-in-law help me? And she's being bashed or assaulted by my father-in-law in front of me. That's how extended the abuse is. And when they leave that abusive relationship, the community cuts them off. When they cut them off, they become so isolated. They say better the devil they know, they go back. But when now they come, especially for me, the women I work with, I always connect them with the services. I connect them with a play group. I connect them with a mother's group. I connect them with a job. I make sure that woman is strong and is standing, because the minute they make friendship, half of your job is done, because they talk among themselves, and you know them because they talk their language. Even if they don't speak their language, they have the woman's language, and they keep on checking on each other, and that woman becomes stronger and stronger, and they continue knowing the services out there for them. When we remove something, we need to give them something, because when you remove them from that abusive relationship, yes, they'll get accommodation. The services will help them, even going to court and everything, but the social aspect of it, which is, first of all, they were isolated. Now they even double isolated. And that is one part we never look at. And I'm talking as the service providers. And once they know they can do something, or they can work, or they can do this, they are very happy, and they start helping other women. They start telling them there's help out there. Housing is a big thing. In fact, many women don't leave, because where will they go? Because they don't know they can go. And even, let's say, for example, you give them the housing, they think, where will I get money to feed them? Because they don't even know the system can give them money to live off. So there's all these things, and the courage. What will people say? Like one woman recently told me, Rosemary, nobody can come to me. No, nobody is inviting me for housewarming. Nobody is inviting me for let's say birthday parties, because all the families, all the friends have cut her. And I had to work hard to get her a group, and most of them, they don't want even to associate, to go to those groups where the communities are, because they are the ones who cut them. And it is very sad, because we women are the one who's cutting this woman away. So and that's one thing, we need to change our thinking. And when we're in the community, we need to support this woman, and let her belong to something. So this woman goes back, but when she gets another group, she will be strong, and she will not go back. So I find a lot of the multicultural communities, women, they don't leave the abusive relationship. First, the parents are telling them, you'll give us the shame. They don't have any money to their name. They don't have a passport because it was taken. They don't have even anything of value. Everything is taken by the husband. And then also, because they don't know the information here, they keep on saying, oh, you'll be deported back. You'll be deported back. If you don't have a visa, it's worse. I'll cancel your visa. That is the song they hear every evening. And it is so sad that somebody came in this country when they are happy, and within 1 year, they are nothing. And it's not the education. Some are doctors, some are accountants. It's not the education. It's because the abuser removes all that power and leaves you helpless.
Very powerful, Rosemary. I mean, Pieter, you've talked about how important the service response was for you, and you bring it down to one individual.
Yeah.
But how important was that, those connections with people?
It was really important, because as you say, as Rosemary just said, then you have no connection to anyone. No, I had no friends, I had no family, and even if I did, I was not allowed to have any contact with that. Was completely. I mean, I think even to go to Vinnies was. I don't think I even let him know when I was doing that. But that was, but then it didn't bother him, I don't think, even when he did find out, because he was financially abusing me as well. So I was going to seek financial assistance. So that just meant he could take more of my money and leave me and the kids in more of a rut, and he wouldn't care. But I was just listening to all of you talk, and I listened to you, Pamela, and you say how it's such a complex situation, and it really is. And coming from someone who lived it, and I'm not living everyone else's experience, but there's that's why it is so complex, because there's no two situations or 3 or 4 situations of domestic violence or poverty that are alike. So there is no formula to help the situation. But as Annabelle has fought for, housing accommodations and more places, and the importance of that is safe haven, because anyone that is in domestic violence or poverty, all you need is somewhere safe. I mean, safety is, and to feel that is the key for new beginnings. And if you can't have that, then you feel like you're in an even bigger hole. So I'm listening to all you talk, and you all have so much valid advice and information to give and to provide to this panel. And when you're talking, I just want to get out there and have something to say. Because you guys are just explaining just how complex the actual situation really is. And Pamela, you were talking about men, right? Now, I mean, and Christine, you were talking about men in the communities, and how women want to seek their accommodation for them. And I know that, because even though I was a victim, to get out of it, I wanted to make sure that he had accommodation to go to, because I felt like if he had somewhere to be, then my safe place would be my safe place. He wouldn't need to come back. Well, that's the hope anyhow. But the thing is that these perpetrators, is whether they're men or women, because it comes either way. There is no statistics about them, as you say, Pama. I don't know if I just pronounced your name right, but I'm sorry. But they're also not held accountable for their part in this way of living and this situation that people have had to go through. And I think that's a big problem. I think it's a big problem that perpetrators aren't made to acknowledge what they've actually put another human being through. They're not educated on their own behaviour. And I think that there needs to be something out there that forces them to understand what their behaviour does to another person. And maybe look at the bigger statistics as to why does a perpetrator become a perpetrator. Because these are the things that need to be looked at if we really want big change, because change is only going to happen if we fix both sides, not just one side.
Incredibly powerful, Peter, and I think that's what's coming through in the chat as well, that you're speaking from experience, from your heart, and you're speaking the truth. So thank you so much. Annabelle, reflecting on that, there has been, well, I'll just get you to reflect on it. I'll try not to, I'll try just to be the MC rather than insert myself.
No, that's quite okay, Padma, and thank you, Peter. I think you've explained in such a beautiful way some of the most important considerations and the complexity, and you've lived it. So, thank you for describing what you see. It's so powerful, and I think for me, just reflecting on that piece, I mean, like, we can't prevent domestic violence unless we have accountability for people who use it. And I think that's what it comes down to. We need to make people accountable for the violence that they use. And at the moment, it's still really hard to say in Australia, male violence against women, without somebody coming at you for saying those words. And unless and until we can have a conversation about male violence against women and how it impacts systemically, we can't even begin to address perpetration and accountability properly. And so I think that's got to be a major focus. And I think the announcement this week is one part of it. This is a wicked social problem. And, and if it was an easy problem to solve, we would have solved it years ago. And so I think we need to recognise the complexity of it. And I absolutely agree with you, Peter, in what you've said about safe accommodation for perpetrators. And I really think that those kinds of initiatives are going to be the next frontier in the work that we do, because we absolutely need safe places and safe housing for women, because we know that it's not always going to be safe for women to stay in the homes where the abuse has occurred. And that's a fact. We also know that where it is safe for women to be able to stay in the homes that they have, then we should do absolutely everything that we can to support that and to support the woman, so that she also might not need to uproot her children and move them to a different school, with all of the attendant disruption that goes with that. Because, if you're experiencing abuse, you're already at a disadvantage, let alone having to, tear up your life and start again. So, I think what we need to recognise is exactly what Peter said, that everybody's situation is a little bit different, that we need to have different responses, and what's more, that we need to walk alongside women and empower them to access the choice that is best for them and that will work best for them, their family and their community in experiencing all of this, and to hold users of abuse to account for their behaviour.
I'd like to bring you in at this point, Christine, reflecting on that point around how do you keep perpetrators accountable in communities that are connected and different to mainstream communities.
I think it's important that part of it is around building the capacity of the community to understand what domestic violence is, the dynamics, but also I think there's a lot of communities now that are working in that space that are trying to look at domestic violence and perpetrators and offending behaviours. We need a skilled workforce in that area. I think we still need to increase on that. But I do think going back to some of the stuff that came out of the National Summit, the Safety Summit around women and around community control, around community ownership, because if Aboriginal people feel invested in the process, they will make a difference. So I think having opportunities to be part of that process, there are a lot of people out there that want to change the behaviours and do want to make people accountable, but they also want to educate perpetrators. They want to, as Peter said, educate perpetrators, educate victims, educate the whole community so that we don't have that bystander behaviour, that we don't have the gatekeepers protecting people that are doing perpetrated behaviours. And what we do find is sometimes, you know, there are perpetrators or offenders that have grown up in that, you know, that kind of with that lifestyle, and that's what they know, and so that's the behaviour they repeat. And so if they have the tools or resources to be able to change that mindset, maybe that will happen for them. But we also see the perpetrators that go from one partner to another partner that, you know, are abusive to their intimate partner, to their mothers, to any woman in their network. So I think we need to look at accountability. I work in the Women's Legal Service. We look at saying, if you want that, you can get information, advice from us, and know what your options are. But it's your choice ultimately if you want to take that next step and actually take legal action. It's just about equipping and, like someone said, empowering women to make choices about what's best for them and what's best for their certain set of, their circumstances. So yeah, I think we just need to sort of be able to give people communities the right tools, because I think the community is ready to sort of start working in this area and start changing the behaviours, because no one really, not many of the community members want to condone violence in the community. They want safe families, they want safe, women and children, and safe perpetrators, and they don't want anyone going to jail. We know Aboriginal people have the highest rate of incarceration, male and female, per population. So we don't want to see people going to prison. We want to try and give people the tools to change their behaviours. But if they don't, there is a consequence, and there should be a consequence, and people should be held accountable for that behaviour.
Thank you, Christina. I think I've come to this, to ANROS fairly recently, and some of the most powerful work I've seen is the work around intergenerational trauma. And that's not just talking about, when we talk about trauma, we're not just talking about Aboriginal communities. We're talking about the fact of family and domestic violence, and looking at intergenerational trauma. There's been some great work done on looking at the sort of correlation between kids who were sexually abused, who then go on to be either perpetrators or victims of violence, and recognizing that intergenerational trauma is so central to us understanding how we can have a healing-informed, trauma-informed response to it. And Rosemary, you brought this up as well in terms of the, watching your in-laws perpetuate violence, and how you break that cycle. And I think part of that complexity is around, how do we break a cycle when it has been intergenerational and passed on through generations in terms of accepted behaviour? You're on mute. Yeah.
Yes, I think we need to start education. We start education in the house. We start talking to our children, both men, boys and girls. We start telling them this is not okay. You can start small things. For example, during these 16 days, you can light a candle in your house. And when the kids come, they will say, what is the candle for? Then start talking about it. Talk about it openly. Because when I have been working with the police for the last 15 years as a community liaison officer, and we were not allowed to work with the men, the perpetrator. But I used to work with them myself, not as the police, because we were not allowed. We were only supposed to support the women. It's just like these fingers. If this finger is aching, the whole body aches. So when the wife is aching, when if the husband is out there without a house, the wife is still aching. She has got children with that man. As much as he's bad, it doesn't mean that they don't care. Today is a bit different because there are services like Baptist, they work with the men, Relationship Australia, they have programs for the men. And as Peter says, they need, if a perpetrator comes, needs the courts to give them a mandatory maybe 2 years to be going for those, not only counseling, but educating why it's wrong to hit another human being. The ones who stop hitting because they'll be found by maybe you'll be seen emotionally abused. All those. And also educating our grandparents, our parents. We educate all the levels so that they understand it's a no, 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 no. Like I always say, why would you hit your wife and you don't hit your son or your daughter? Hey, this is an adult. Why would you hit her? And another thing I also do within my work is because the women don't want to put down a statement because the husband keeps on saying, oh, you'll spoil my job, you'll spoil my job, that what will I be paying? All your bills with or pay the house. What we do with my police nowadays, I'm in Campbelltown, the police officer goes and talks to the man and says, these are all the wrong things you're doing, all this thing. And your wife is not putting in a statement, but she cannot be like that forever. The day she will report you, you will be in jail. And we have seen men change because they need somebody to talk to them, tell them how it is. Because most of them, they just think, oh, this is okay, because as what we see. So education is the main key. And not condoning. In the office, people, the men maybe say sexist things and we smile or laugh. We need to stop them there. Even also in the house when they say, oh, that girl, see how she's dressing up, that's why they are raped. You need to stop it there. So you don't wait until it's a right, you just need to mention it there, that it's not okay. So if we start and everybody, not only people working that area or not only the men or the women, everybody to be their business to stop. And let us educate our men in our lives. I'm very happy during these 16 days, the change to the men. The men like us in Campbelltown, we are doing videos for different men to say, what have they done within the 365 days to do with the abuse of the women. So by doing that, they'll start and we'll put all over in the social media, thank God, and the ones who will see it, it will be pampered in their heads until they wake up. Because for me, I always think it's we, the parents, who start. Yes, we got it from our parents and the great parents. We need to stop with that and start saying, no, we need to change the coin. Even a song, you sing that song for 2 years, you change it. Now we need to change and say everyone is equal, and we need to spell it out and say it is wrong. When you see your young boy or your grandchild trying to say, oh, you are a girl, go and clean the dishes or something like that. Let us start the conversation from the house.
There was a great question in the chat about, and I think going from your comments, Rosemary, about whether we start really young, whether we start at schools. What do people think? I mean, primary prevention has been, it's really interesting, even watching the response, the announcement this week from New South Wales, which is fantastic. It's about responding to the problem rather than thinking about the behaviours that we need to stop in the first place. So how important is primary prevention, and when is too early to start? Peter?
I just say, I don't think it's, I mean, look, I don't think it's too early. Or is there an early age? No, I don't. I don't know how to say it because I don't think so. But like, I'm just listening to Rosemary talk as well about education, because like, I just want to give some like educational like knowledge, because I know, because like I work at RPA Hospital as a parent supporter, and I work in child protection, and a lot of clients I work with now have got domestic violence issues. Now there is a program that Relationships Australia do offer, but men actually have to voluntarily go into the group, and it is an educational program where they learn about their behaviour and what it actually does to their partners and what domestic violence is. You know, I feel as if that something like that needs to be mandatory. So that they are education, because I went, after being in domestic violence, I went and done a program where I learnt about what domestic violence was, because and it opened my eyes, because half the stuff I didn't even think was abuse, but it was. So I was educated on my own, you know, what was happening to me, and then I learnt how to live out of it, and then you know, it was a program of me learning to live out of domestic violence, because you become so accustomed to living in it that it's actually scary to think that you can live out of it. As you say, like, I think you can start young, you know, like, my son was 4 years old when he started to have behaviours that were his father's towards me, and I'm talking kicking me or spitting at me, calling me names. So if that's 4 years old, if things don't change and those behaviours around that child doesn't change, and this is when I used my voice and said enough is enough, because my son will not be this to a woman. And so he was 4. I had to get him out of that environment. And it was hard. And even though I would educate him and tell him, you don't do this to a woman, you love a woman, you look after them, you open the door, you say beautiful things, you know, I would always try to give positive, even though I was feeling shit. So 4 years old, is that too young? I don't think so. Can we educate them younger? Little children are sponges. If they can learn multiple languages as a child, then we can educate them of what's socially acceptable and what's not. So yeah, I think it needs to start, yes, within home. We could educate kids in school. I think as Annabelle has said and Pama has said, we need to start talking. We need to start talking about it. It can't not be something that's socially not, you know, able to talk. It's got to be spoken about. You know, it's like that ad. Sorry, I'm going to go all off the grid here. It's like that ad where they go, you know, put a stick in someone's poo and they get it tested. We need to start talking about this, because, you know, something needs to change here. You know, and we're taking the steps. Things are happening, but now it's about how do we make change, and as I've said, accountability, you know, but it comes down to conversation. Conversation is education. Education is knowledge. And that's where I think we'll have some social change. But as women as well that are victims of it, I think we have to look at our background. What have we witnessed growing up? So what are we allowing to be okay? And we need to also look at that as well and say change. Like, I mean, I witnessed my mother and my father fighting. So did I think that my father was the kind of man that I should be with? So we need to look at it. I guess it's all psychometric as well. Again, it's a very complex situation.
It is. And I think if we were all together physically, you'd have several standing ovations at the moment, Peter. You just have a great way of summing up the complexity and what we need to do. There's a few questions that I'm just going to look at. You did talk about, and let's talk about this together, education of the police, and maybe Rosemary, I'll go to you. There's a question about when my neighbour John Edwards murdered his 2 children and his wife sought protection from the local police, she was not believed because she had to go to them before her. Later in the inquest, a local policeman admitted she had no knowledge of the act or how to deal with domestic violence. So you've been with the police, you said 15 years. Have you seen a change in both how they deal with domestic violence, but also how they deal with especially immigrant communities and domestic violence?
A lot of change has been there. For example, like now in my where I sit, we have a whole team. We have a surgeon. We have people under. We have about 10 police officers nowadays. If somebody calls, a supervisor goes. If it is domestic violence, and there will be the police at the domestic violence team. They'll be visiting that house every day to make sure the woman is safe. They will come to me and say, for example, if they are from multicultural communities, they'll come to me and I'll start supporting that woman. Then if it is a Aboriginal liaison officer, they'll go to that and they will support that. So today it has changed 360 degrees from the time I started. Now, even if somebody calls a neighbor, and then when they go there, she say, no, there's nothing because she's scared, the police will still follow. Now there is a meeting called SAMS, where all those complex cases, all the services working in that space, they all meet once a month and they study that case. So the legal aid is there, the domestic support, victim support is there, the police is there, all the other, even the other organizations who have refuge homes or work in that area. They all sit down and they go and they check and they see. Now before they could say, I'm withdrawing a case, now you can't withdraw. It's the magistrate which withdraws it. Before, if you say withdraw, the police could withdraw it. Now they can't. It's the magistrate who have to go through it and withdraw. So if I can answer that question, yes, before there's a lot of training, there's a whole team, and even the systems, it is documented in a proper way. If the person doesn't understand, somebody explains to her. And we guide them on how to be recording. You know, the abusers continue going talking, like the Parramatta Catholic Diocese, they came up with this app. I don't know whether you have heard it. It's a very good one called IRIS, IRIS, where you can document everything. You can take even the video, the date, the time, and even if you lose the phone, you can access it through your computer. So this information is very good because you know, when you are so abused and you are all over, you forget everything. You just remember that thing. But when you document it, you just upload it and it's all there. So we are encouraging the service providers, tell the women to upload this app and they record. Even if they abused you, you cut that message and post it there. And if nobody can know it's the domestic violence app, because it is like a flower, and when it opens up like in a different way. Nobody will ever know, even if your husband or partner comes and gets you on it.
Bit like Anne Rose. Christine, I guess that one of the issues with policing with Aboriginal communities has been the high number of misidentification of women as perpetrators. So can you talk about, I mean, has policing improved? We've seen a continual over-incarceration of Aboriginal men and women. Would you say you've seen any shift in the way that, you know, it's a generalisation, but policing and domestic violence in Aboriginal communities in New South Wales?
I think that there has been a shift. The problem is it's not consistent. I still don't think we are still concerned with the amount of cultural specific training they have around Aboriginal people. And, you know, so I do know that from where we stand that, you know, at the top with the police, because I sit around that table at the death review team, and I do see that they are moving quickly around trying to implement different things that are going to keep women safe or keep victims safe from domestic violence. But it's around, it's more around, I think that thing that someone can't hear me, but yeah, it's more around being compliant. And so if they have if they do have structures or policies in place or protocols in place, they need to follow them, and they need to be followed everywhere. Because what we're hearing is, you know, we do have the specialist DV trained police officers, and they really sort of are more around the training, have more intensive training, do more intensive work in that space. However, sometimes we also think that they can be very judgmental. It doesn't mean that because you're in that space and you've had more training that you're not going to be judgmental. You're not going to say, well, why do you keep going back? Why do you put up with this? This is part of the process around domestic violence, and women will leave in their own time or when they're ready to leave. And I think that's one of the important things. But in relation to training, I think there's more of it. I do think that they need more though. I do think that they need to have it more regularly, because I don't think what they're having is enough. And I do think that there needs to be better checks and balances around audits. And I know that someone said earlier there is a police audit at the moment, but I think there also needs to be audits throughout the year of just checking on police cases, because as someone mentioned earlier with the Edwards case, you know, if that would have been picked up earlier, you know, things may be different now. So it's around checking domestic violence cases coming through police stations and who's going to oversee that. Because if the people at the top in that local area command aren't going to look at it, who is? So someone needs to keep them accountable as well for doing their job, and to make sure that that we all have the right, we know that the police are there to protect us and keep us safe, but they've got to keep everyone safe, and they've got to protect everyone, not just, you know, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people. Pick and be selective about what community they're going to be better at and be more involved with, and to always treat people with respect, because it's that thing around that, like you touched on, primary aggressor. Not going in there thinking that this is a situation, let's unpack the situation, let's find out what's going on. But we've got things in place now around legislation, looking at some of those things in the past, who's been notified to the police, keeping a better system and checks about how often, you know, these incidents are happening with with partners or, you know, families. So going back to your question, I do think that there have been changes. I do think the police are trying to work towards moving ahead and improving how they deal with Aboriginal communities, but I still don't think they're there. Yeah.
It's complex, and when you think about how big the police force is and how prevalent the issue of family violence is, it says some things too. Does anyone have any final observations? I know we have to. Peter, absolutely. We'd love to finish with you.
Sorry, I just want to finish on a note, because we're talking about police, and I just want to say that my view of the change between 8 years ago with my husband to probably just last year with my current partner, because even though I'm with a new partner and he's safe, I did live 15 years of domestic violence, so I still do have a lot of trauma. So I did call the police out on him because he yelled at me and I didn't like it. And the way the police responded 8 years ago, in comparison to a year ago, I feel is dramatically different. I only just recently tried to get my files on my domestic violence case with my husband, and there's actually no evidence and no records. So if we want to see the difference in comparison to now, I can get everything that was written about when I called them out in regards to my current partner, and that was just because I was feeling threatened and I didn't like his demeanour towards me because it re-traumatised me. Yeah. It's all written there. So if I look at the way that the police handled it 8 years ago, they actually didn't file or didn't notate anything. So if something was to happen to me, they would not have had any evidence or something to go back on, and there would be no pattern to see. Where in comparison today, it's record, it's written down, they can see if there's a pattern. So I do believe that police are making some changes. As Christine says, there's a lot of change that needs to be made still, especially when they're the front line of domestic violence. I mean, I think they're the most important ones. Considering they come out, they need to be even more up to scratch. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
No worries. Sorry. Thank you. I had
No. It's really good to see that there might be some positive change. And
Yeah.
Rosemary, you have your hand up. Would you like to say something? You're muted.
I just wanted to say we need to stop being bystanders, because many people are bystanders. You see things are happening, you hear and you don't do anything. We need, when you hear something, call 000. The other day, in fact, this week, 2 days ago, my friend called me. He was just saying, oh, the neighbor called that the woman next door is shouting, crying. What do? I said, call 000 quickly. Yeah. And he said, what will they know that I have called? I said, no, they will not tell them that you called. And for sure he did that. So many people call me asking, what can I do? And I say, call 000. Save somebody. You can see, even in the street, you can see people fighting and somebody hitting a woman and nobody does nothing. So if all of us can do something, if all of us can check on each other, if all of us can stand and share that love and just extend that hand, there will be a change in this world.
What a beautiful note to end on, that it's everybody's business and that we all have a role to play. I understand there's a networking event straight after this for 30 minutes for whoever wants to join. But can I ask you all to join me in thanking this amazing panel that we've had tonight? I think we could have talked for another few hours.
Thank you, Vinnies, for having us here, and thank you, for just giving me the opportunity to talk. Thank you.
You were incredible, Peter, and we've learned so much from all of you. So huge thanks from
me. Nice to meet you all.
Same here.
Thank you.